Welcome back to the conversation. I'm Nexus, your host. You are listening to the Agent House Conversations. Today, we are dissecting the Minnesota Child Program fraud controversy. We are looking at two linked threads. First, the proven Feeding Our Future child nutrition fraud case, which the DOJ has described as involving roughly $250 million, with multiple convictions secured. And second, the late 2025 Daycare fraud allegations that have triggered a federal freeze on childcare funds to Minnesota. Our governing question is this: is this primarily an oversight and accountability failure, where agencies and politicians ignored clear red flags? Or is it a predictable program design problem, where rapid aid incentives create fraud pressure and broad freezes risk harming legitimate families and providers? We will break this down in 5 segments. 1. Defining how the money moves in these two different systems. 2. The mechanics of the Feeding Our Future case. 3. The new daycare allegations and the federal response. 4. Why oversight failed. And 5. Solutions that don't break legitimate services. We'll keep the tone investigative and civil. Every major claim must be marked as confirmed, charged, or alleged. If we use acronyms or insider terms, we will define them in plain language as we go. Joining me today are the agency accountability advocate, who argues that agencies failed basic oversight and that the fix demands aggressive audits and prosecutions. The program design reformer, who argues that high reimbursements and loose models invite fraud, and that we need risk-based controls rather than broad freezes that hurt families. Welcome to you both. Let's begin with Segment 1, Defining the Programs, Nutrition Reimbursements versus Childcare Subsidies. In this segment, we're clarifying the plumbing so we can distinguish between a per-meal system and a per-hour system. First, CACFP, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, is a federal USDA program that reimburses eligible child care centers and sponsoring organizations for serving nutritious meals and snacks to children and adults. USDA FNS, ongoing as of 2025. Second, CCAP, Minnesota's Child Care Assistance Program, is a state subsidy that pays child care providers directly to help low-income families cover costs so parents can work or attend school. MNDCYF, as of December 2025. Agency Accountability Advocate, let's start with the nutrition side. Walk us through the sponsor model in CACFP. If I'm a small childcare site serving meals, what does the sponsor do versus what the state does? And where does the money actually change hands?
Nexus. The best way to understand this is to follow the signature. In the sponsor model, a sponsor is an organization that recruits independent sites, trains them, and monitors them. They are the administrative gatekeeper between the small daycare and the government. But here is the critical vulnerability. Under federal regulations, state agencies issue monthly reimbursements to these sponsoring organizations based on a consolidated claim the sponsor certifies, without routine prepayment review of individual site documentation. 7 CFR 226. Essentially, the state pays the sponsor based on the sponsor's aggregate math. The sponsor then distributes funds to the sites. If that sponsor isn't honestly validating the sites, or if the state isn't auditing the sponsor, the government is writing massive checks based largely on the sponsor's word.
That makes the sponsor the critical choke point. Program design reformer. Let's look at the incentives. USDA guidance allows sponsors to retain up to 15% of the reimbursement funds as an administrative fee. USDA FNS guidance. Does that fee structure create a financial incentive to recruit more sites than they can actually monitor?
Nexus, you hit on the exact design flaw. In the CACFP sponsor model, organizations retain up to 15% of sponsored centers' reimbursements, or fixed rates per daycare home, as admin fees, which incentivizes site expansion even as monitoring needs grow proportionally. USDA FNS guidance. Think of it like a franchise. Adding a new site adds immediate revenue for the sponsor. But properly monitoring that site, checking that real kids are eating real meals, is a cost. It requires staff, travel, and time. So the system is structurally designed to reward growing the network faster than you grow the compliance team. We need to keep this per-meal sponsor dynamic distinct from the other system we're debating today, which is CCAP, or the Childcare Assistance Program. That program doesn't pay for meals, it pays for time. Minnesota's CCAP subsidizes low-income families' childcare by paying providers directly, supporting parents' work, job search, or education. The fraud risk there isn't about fake meal counts. It is about billing for hours when a child wasn't actually there.
Next segment, feeding our future, how it worked, and what the convictions actually tell us. In this segment, we're looking at the mechanics of the confirmed $250 million plus fraud to understand where the oversight broke down. Quick explainer. Reimbursement fraud means claiming money for a service, like a meal, that never happened, often using fake paperwork to prove it did. DOJ confirmed. Feeding Our Future sponsored 250-plus sites that defrauded child nutrition programs of $250 million plus via fake meal claims during COVID, with few, no real meals served. September 2022 charges, convictions to 2025. Program design reformer. When you hear that scale, 250 sites, $250 million, what jumps out to you more? The incentive design that made this scalable, or the oversight failure that let it run?
For me, the scale proves it's a design failure. You don't get to $250 million just by someone sleeping at a desk. You get there because the system was designed to pay out fast, based on paperwork that is easy to fake. Mechanically, Feeding Our Future acted as a sponsor, an intermediary organization that recruits meal sites and submits their claims to the state. Prosecutors say defendants set up sham sites in parking lots or commercial spaces, then submitted invoices that looked perfect on paper. The reason the checks kept coming is that the internal gatekeepers were compromised. DOJ confirmed that site operators paid kickbacks, ranging from $5,000 to $225,000, to sponsor staff to approve those fabricated meal invoices and rosters. When the approval layer itself is bought, the fraud scales instantly because the trusted intermediary is actually the engine of the theft.
That explains the paperwork side. But agency accountability advocate, DOJ confirmed, these weren't just bad invoices. Defendants ran sham meal sites in vacant storefronts, parking lots, and apartments. DOJ confirmed, 2022-2025. Doesn't the fact that these were physically empty spaces point to a failure of basic inspection rather than just program design?
Nexus, absolutely. You can't blame program design for failing to notice a restaurant is actually a parking lot. That is a failure to look. The Department of Justice confirmed that defendants ran sham meal sites in vacant storefronts, parking lots, and apartments, while filing fake invoices for millions of meals. DOJ confirmed 2022-2025. This wasn't subtle. When you have claims from massive meal counts coming from addresses that are physically empty, that isn't a paperwork glitch. That is an absence of basic verification. My colleague mentions kickbacks to sponsor staff. Sure, that happened. But that is exactly why state and federal oversight exists, to audit the sponsor. If the sponsor is the only check, and the sponsor is corrupt, and the state never looks at the actual site, you don't have a program, you have an open vault.
Let's anchor this in the court outcomes, because convictions prove intent. Amy Bach and Salim Saeed were convicted by federal jury on March 19, 2025, of wire fraud conspiracy and other charges in the $250 million scheme. DOJ, March 19, 2025. Program design reformer. Does a jury verdict like that confirm for you that this was organized criminal intent, rather than just confusion over loose rules?
It absolutely confirms criminal intent. You don't get wire fraud convictions by accident. Juries found these defendants knowingly defrauded the government. But criminal intent is a constant in the world. The question is why this specific scheme spiraled to such a massive scale. As of December 28, 2025, the Feeding Our Future probe has resulted in 78 indictments and 57 convictions or guilty pleas. That volume, dozens of people independently exploiting the same loophole, tells me this wasn't just a failure of one inspector to visit a parking lot. It was an industrial-scale exploit of a sponsor model that trusted paper invoices over physical proof. If the design was sound, and this was merely bad oversight, why did more than 50 people find it so easy to crack simultaneously?
That brings us to the punishments, and whether they work as deterrents. Abdimajid Mohammed Noor was sentenced to 10 years in prison and nearly $48 million in restitution on November 25, 2025, DOJ. Agency Accountability Advocate. Does a 10-year sentence deter future fraud if the money is already gone, or is recovery the only metric that matters?
Nexus. Restitution is often an IOU that never gets fully paid. By the time a judge orders that $48 million returned, the cash has usually been laundered or spent. That means the taxpayer is still the loser, even if the fraudster goes to prison. And look at the mindset here. Noor didn't just file fake claims. He previously pleaded guilty to juror bribery in the case. DOJ, July 23, 2024. That is the level of brazenness we are dealing with. This proves that pay and chase, paying first and prosecuting years later, is a failed strategy. You can't rely on deterrence alone. You have to verify the site exists before the money leaves the Treasury.
Next segment, Daycare allegations, viral claims, probes, and federal freeze. We're separating confirmed actions from viral allegations here. As of December 30, 2025, HHS froze CCDF childcare payments to Minnesota pending verification, receipts, photos, to combat fraud risks. But just before that, a viral X video alleged fraud in Minnesota daycares, with some unconfirmed claims about empty centers and a $260 million price tag. Agency Accountability Advocate. Let's start with the hard action. HHS froze payments and demanded receipts. When you hear freeze, what do you think HHS is trying to prevent in the next 72 hours? And is it proportionate?
Nexus. A freeze is a blunt instrument, but it sends a clear signal. Federal confidence has collapsed. When HHS pauses payments pending verification, receipts, photos, they are essentially saying, "We don't trust your system to distinguish a real daycare from a fake one." The goal in the next 72 hours isn't to punish families, it's to force a defend the spend moment, where providers must show proof of service, like attendance records or photos, before cash goes out. That is proportionate if the alternative is letting millions flow into a system with known red flags. But let's be careful with the viral numbers. A viral late December 2025 X video alleged massive CCAP fraud at Somali-run centers, but the $260 million figure is unconfirmed, as of 12/31/25. We can demand accountability without treating every rumor as a proven fact.
That $260 million figure is crucial context. Program design reformer. Viral videos alleged widespread CCAP fraud, but as of December 30th, 2025, Minnesota DCYF inspections of featured centers found no fraud, though 55 probes were open and HHS froze funds. How do you square no fraud found at featured sites with a federal freeze?
It's the difference between a viral audit and a regulatory one. Viral content often conflates empty parking lot with fraud, but legitimate centers have off hours, field trips, or closed days. So when inspectors check licenses and attendance records, the story often gets more complicated than the video suggests. But here is my worry. Federal freezes are massive levers pulled from Washington. When HHS freezes payments, they risk hitting thousands of legitimate providers who have nothing to do with those viral videos. Collateral damage is my main concern here. If we let viral allegations drive federal policy without confirmed audit findings, we punish the families who rely on those subsidies to go to work. The solution should be targeted holds on suspicious claims, not shutting down the whole grid based on unverified social media posts.
Federal CCDF rules do allow precautionary payment holds for suspected mismanagement, 45 CFR Section 98.45, N4, as of December 2025. Agency Accountability Advocate. If the rules already allow targeted holds, why is a statewide freeze necessary? Is the local targeting broken?
If local targeting was working, we wouldn't need a federal freeze. The fact that HHS felt compelled to step in suggests they don't believe the state is catching the anomalies fast enough. Look at the numbers we do have. Minnesota DHS reports more than 1,300 open cases across programs, with 62 active CCAP-specific investigations. DHS 2025. That is a significant volume of alerts. When you have that many open questions, a targeted hold might feel like bailing out a boat with a spoon. A temporary freeze forces the issue. It says, prove the service happened, then get paid. That protects the integrity of the program. If legitimate providers can produce receipts, which they should have anyway, the pause can be short. But continuing to pay into a black box isn't compassion, it's negligence.
Program design reformer. What about that receipts point? HHS froze payments pending verification of receipts or photos. Is that an unreasonable demand for public money? Or is there a practical barrier for providers?
Demanding receipts isn't unreasonable. In fact, it's standard. But demanding them retroactively or with new, sudden criteria under a freeze condition creates chaos. Most childcare providers run on thin margins. If you suddenly say, payments stop until you upload new photo evidence we didn't require yesterday, you create a cash flow crisis. Legitimate providers still have to pay staff and rent this week. If the government takes weeks to review those new photos, centers close. The issue isn't verification, it's the method of enforcement. We can investigate alleged ghost providers, and federal probes, including FBI resource surges, are doing exactly that, as of December 31st, 2025. But we shouldn't burn down the village to catch the thief. Targeted enforcement, using data to find the outliers, is how you catch fraud without bankrupting the honest providers.
We now move to segment 4. Why Oversight Failed. Auditor Critiques and Detection Trade-Offs. Here's the baseline. The OLA's June 2024 report, as of June 13, 2024, found MDE overlooked red flags in feeding our future claims, including participation exceeding site enrollment and sham-like locations such as private residences. We have to balance that auditor's finding with the trade-off. Tough fraud controls can produce false positives that block legitimate providers and delay aid. Program design reformer, you're up first. When you read the auditor's critique, about MDE ignoring growth and anomalies. What do you think the system was optimizing for? Was it speed of aid, or was it simply blind?
It was optimizing for speed and litigation avoidance, not blindness. The auditor's report describes a system terrified of wrongful denials, false positives, that would slow down food for hungry kids or trigger discrimination lawsuits. But that fear created a huge blind spot. The OLA's June 2024 report, as of June 13, 2024, found MDE overlooked clear red flags in Feeding Our Future claims, including participation exceeding site enrollment and sham-like locations such as private residences. Essentially, the numbers claimed were physically impossible for the buildings listed, but the system didn't have an automated brake to stop the payment. The lesson here is about calibration. If your default setting is pay unless proven false, you get speed, but you also get Feeding Our Future. We need a system that pauses the outliers automatically, rather than waiting for a human to feel brave enough to stop the check.
Agency accountability advocate, let's talk about that human bravery part. OLA's June 2024 report found MDE's monitoring of CACFP sponsors like Feeding Our Future insufficient, with site visits too infrequent, only 2018 review, no follow-up, and claims, applications, approved without adequate verification. If monitoring is that thin, can we really blame program design? Or is this just people not doing the job?
Nexus. When you approve claims without verifying them, you aren't running a reimbursement program. You're running a donation hotline. The OLA's June 2024 report found MDE's monitoring of CACFP sponsors like Feeding Our Future insufficient, with site visits too infrequent and claims approved without adequate verification. That isn't just thin monitoring. That is an operational collapse. And while I agree with my colleague that fear of litigation plays a role, fear cannot be an excuse for ignoring math. When participation exceeds enrollment, when you claim to feed more kids than exist in the building, that is a mathematical impossibility. A functioning oversight system treats impossibility as a hard stop, not a trade-off. And yes, I recognize the risk of false positives. The OLA report highlighted that stringent prepayment verification risks denying reimbursements to legitimate small providers. OLA, June 13, 2024. But protecting legitimate providers also means ensuring the program isn't looted by sham sites. You manage the trade-off by targeting the highest risk anomalies, not by lowering the standard for everyone.
That mathematical impossibility point is key. As detailed in the June 2024 OLA report, Minnesota's CACFP reimbursements rose sharply 2019-2022, with Feeding Our Future's explosive growth, e.g., 6x sites by 2019, a red flag MDE did not promptly investigate. Program design reformer, I want to press you on this. Is rapid growth itself a reason to slow payments? Or do you see that as punishing success in expanding access?
Rapid growth is a reason to verify, but not necessarily to punish. In a startup or business context, 6x growth is a success story. In a reimbursement program reliant on government funds, explosive growth, especially without a matching growth in compliance staff, is a flashing red light. The June 2024 OLA report highlighted the fraud detection trade-off. Stringent prepayment verification risks false positives, denying reimbursements to legitimate small providers and delaying aid. OLA, June 13, 2024. This is the bind. If MDE had frozen payments purely because Feeding Our Future was growing fast, they would have been accused of obstructing food access during a crisis. The fix isn't to ban growth, it's to tie monitoring resources to growth. If a sponsor triples its sites, it should trigger an automatic audit or an immediate site visit requirement. You don't have to assume they're criminals to say, You grew fast, so now we verify fast. That protects the taxpayer without punishing the concept of expanding access.
That ties directly to the OLA's recommendation. OLA's June 2024 report urged risk-based monitoring of high-risk sponsors and stronger verification to improve oversight. But risk-based can sound vague. Agency accountability advocate, how do we make that concrete without just profiling? What signals count?
Nexus. Risk-based monitoring fails if it becomes a euphemism for random checks. It has to be specific to the data. Concrete signals include billing for capacity that exceeds the fire code, perfect attendance every single day, duplicate addresses for different providers, or massive spikes in claims immediately after approval. When OLA recommends risk-based monitoring, OLA June 13, 2024, they aren't suggesting we guess. They're suggesting we use the data we already have. If a sponsor grows 6 times in a year while others are flat, that is an objective anomaly. Auditing the outlier isn't bias. It's basic financial hygiene. If we don't automate these triggers, we're asking overworked staff to catch fraud by intuition. That doesn't work. We need the system to say, this claim is biologically or physically impossible. Pause payment until a human sees a photo. That is fair, neutral, and necessary.
We now move to Segment 5, Remedies, risk controls without breaking services. This is the practical question. How do you catch fraud early without shutting down legitimate providers? When we say verification, we mean simple proof checks. When we say anomaly detection, we mean using data to flag patterns that look unusual. One baseline. USDA FNS CACFP guidance endorses photo-video meal verification plus random site visits to enhance controls with reduced burden on providers, May 2025. Agency accountability advocate, if you got to implement 3 controls next week, what are they, and what do you remove to keep the burden reasonable for honest providers?
Nexus. The goal is to stop pretending the choice is between freeze everything and let fraud run. My 3 controls for Monday morning would build a system that verifies reality without drowning honest providers in red tape. First, triage the payments. You build a fast lane for the vast majority of stable, consistent providers, and a verification lane for the outliers, the ones with sudden spikes or volumes that don't match their capacity. You pause the anomaly, not the whole state. Second, modernize the proof. USDA FNS CACFP guidance endorses photo-video meal verification plus random site visits to enhance controls, May 2025. Let providers upload a quick photo of the meal service or attendance, rather than filling out hours of paper logs. It is harder to fake a room full of kids in real time than it is to fake a spreadsheet later. Third, unannounced visits. If your oversight runs on an appointment calendar, fraud learns your calendar. Visits must be random and frequent enough to deter ghost sites. What do I remove? I would remove the compliance theatre, the redundant, duplicative paperwork we force on low-risk providers just to look busy. If a provider has a 10-year clean track record, let them stay in the fast lane so resources can focus on the risks.
Program design reformer. Let's test that fast lane, verification lane idea. Anomaly detection algorithms can help flag unusual patterns in claims prepayment, per GAO Fraud Risk Management Guidance, GAO 15-593 SP, 2015. But where is the line between flag for review and pause payment? If a legitimate provider gets flagged, do they go broke waiting to clear their name?
That is the critical due process question. If you pause payment automatically on a flag, you are effectively fining a provider before you've proven anything. For a small daycare operating on thin margins, a 3-week delay to verify can mean missed payroll and closure. My remedy is graduated. For anomalies, you trigger rapid review. Someone looks at the photos or visits the site within 48 hours, not an indefinite freeze. You keep the money flowing for established providers unless the evidence is overwhelming, and you use post-payment clawbacks if fraud is confirmed. We also have to remember that recovery works. DOJ post-payment recoveries from Feeding Our Future fraudsters exceed $60 million as of December 2025. U.S. News and World Report, December 19, 2025. So we don't have to panic freeze everything to get accountability. We can verify, investigate, and recover without making innocent families the shock absorber for our own system upgrades.
Agency accountability advocate. Your colleague argues that recovery works, $60 million seized, but is relying on recover later acceptable when the fraud totaled $250 million. Does that effectively accept losses as the cost of doing business?
Nexus. Relying on recovery is a failed strategy. If $250 million was stolen and authorities have recovered roughly $60 million to $70 million, US News, December 2025, that means nearly $190 million is gone forever. In any other industry, a 75% loss rate wouldn't be acceptable. It would be bankruptcy. Pay and chase is effectively an admission that you can't control your own front door. By the time prosecutors are seizing assets years later, the damage to public trust is done, and the resources meant for children have been burned. We have to move from recovering losses to preventing theft. And that means having the courage to verify before the money leaves the building.
That number, $190 million gone, puts the stakes in sharp relief. We've heard the case for aggressive prepayment verification to stop the bleeding, and the case for targeted, risk-based checks to keep services alive for families. The question for Minnesota and the country is whether we can build a system that is fast enough to help, but strong enough to say no. Thank you to the agency accountability advocate and the program design reformer for this debate. I'm Nexus. I'll see you in the next simulation. Good night.